when you're a fan of soccer and a historian, you get to appreciate the game, but you also get to learn a lot about human societies and the history of human societies and the way that the people who play the game, the way the game's been bound up in their politics and their cultures. And that's what we're here to explore today with the panel of 4 experts who are over here. I'm going to just give you one or two examples of this intertwining of soccer, the game, and human politics, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel here. We've been watching up here all the goals scored from the last Men's World Cup in 2022, right? But if you followed this World Cup at all, you probably also would have seen this, which was the Emir of Qatar, the host of the 2022 World Cup, putting this traditional Qatari robe of honor onto Leo Messi, right? Probably the most famous soccer player in the world. So at this moment, we have soccer, the game, but we also have a politician taking the opportunity to project an image of his own power and his own culture onto a global stage, on maybe one of the biggest global stages in the world. Give you another example, maybe closer to home, of how politics and society intertwine with soccer. So the U.S. women's national team is the most successful women's national team in the world, right? They most recently won the Women's World Cup in 2019. But the story of the women's national team for the last 10 years has also been about their fight for gender equality in the labor market, where they have been involved in quite a number of ways in trying to get something like equitable pay, because they make so much less than the men's team that has accomplished so much less than they have. So we've got soccer, the sport, but we have politics and society at the same time. And we're going to explore this idea as a celebration of the upcoming World Cup from the perspective of 4 different continents with this illustrious panel that's over here next to me. So we're going to start in South America. And for that, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Luis Guilherme Burlamaqui, a visiting scholar at George Washington University. He's edited 2 books on soccer, media, and politics. He's working on another. And he's going to take us to the 1950 World Cup and the Brazilian nation-building project. So, come on up, please. I'll go get your phone set up.
Okay, can I have the...
Yeah, that's right.
Hello, everyone can hear me well? Okay, great. Hello, thank you so much, Levi, for introducing me. Thank you so much, Apart, for inviting me. Thank you so much, Professor Shuka, Professor Nikki, host having this fantastic roundtable today here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1950 World Cup, where Brazil hosted in the 1950 World Cup for the first time. Brazil would later hosted the World Cup 2014. I'm sure a lot of you probably remember that. But this was the first time Brazil ever hosted a World Cup. And I'm going to tell the end of the story. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this story. Brazil lost the final against Uruguay in front of the new stadium that was built just for the World Cup. And this was one of the biggest and more important moments in the history of Brazil's football. That was crucial for many reasons, not only football ones, but also political ones, as I'll try to explore today. The 95th World Cup is one of those moments in Brazil history. I'm trying to think of a connection in terms of the U.S. history as well. It's like one of the moments every Brazilian knows about it. Almost like learn in school how Brazil lost the World Cup in 1950 and how this was like a major defeat, and how everyone was so sad about that, how everyone was so disappointed with Brazilian loss in the new modern big stage of Maracanã. So it's a moment that every Brazilian will probably have to learn, read, or watch a documentary about it, right? So I'm going to try to introduce why and how this was so important for Brazilian national history. So to understand that, we have to go back at 1946, the context of the immediately World War II, right? So when we talk about the word after 1946, there was a lot of questions about the international world order that's going to be created after the World War II. And for Brazil specifically, there was a lot of questions: which role would Brazil play in this international world that emerged after the World War II, right? Um, Brazil was and still is, that's one of the tradition of Brazilian foreign policy, enthusiastic supporter of the United Nations, and what play a very important role in the foundation of the United Nations in the defense of multilateralism, right? Also, for Brazil, was one of the countries that in South America allied to the United States and the Soviet Union against the Axis forces very early in the war. In 1942, Brazil declared war against Germany and the Axis, which is not the case for some of countries in South America, especially Argentina, who remains neutral until 1945. So Brazil, after World War II, expect to play a very important role in the creation of this new international world order that would generate the Cold War in immediately after, right? The war was also very important to Brazil because it helped Brazil to accelerate their industrialization and strengthen a lot of strategic sectors, especially in terms of oil and steel, and to boost the growth. Cities, especially Rio, São Paulo, they grow tremendously during the wartime, and Brazil has definitely risen to a new place after the World War II, right? This, just like I said, this privileged position full a lot of expectations of projection internationally. And a very important part of that, as I'm going to try to show, was the 95th World Cup. And these were not, just like Levy was saying, separate spheres, politics and sports. This guy here, Oswaldo Aranha, was one of the first presidents of the General Assembly of the United Nations. And his brother, Luiz Aranha, was the president of the Brazilian Sports Federation, who in 1946, after one UN meetings, they went directly to the FIFA Congress that was going to be held in Luxembourg at the same year. So Luiz Aranha, who was the chief of this delegation, was the brother of Oswaldo Aranha, who was a crucial architect of this project of Brazil. Just an example of how these diplomatic and sporting networks were connected. And this FIFA 1946 Congress was precisely the Congress that was going to decide where the 1950 World Cup is going to be hosted, right? So it's also very important to understand the role of the South American with FIFA, especially before 1970s. I know probably a lot of you, we can think of the mindset of today and have this idea that probably the most economic and, I'm talking about specifically about money, is pretty much concentrated in European football. That was not the case in 1950s, right? Even, I would say that was not even the case until the 1980s. But in 1950s, we have to consider that for 6 years, there was no game in Europe, right? Because of the war, right? And FIFA, at that time, what kept FIFA alive, today they have a lot of, the most important revenue of FIFA today are the rights of the television. So the televisions, they pay money to FIFA, and that's the most important part of their profit. But at this time, the most important piece of FIFA profit was the fees that were generated by the match revenues. So every match, every international friendly, so let's say Brazil is playing against Argentina, they have to pay 1% to FIFA. So that was the main source of revenue for FIFA at this time, right? So imagine that during 6 years, there's no game in Europe. How FIFA is going to survive with the money coming from South America? So for 6 years, our European there was pretty much no European matches. The South American teams, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, they're still sending regularly the fees for FIFA. They even kept some competitions. So this is the 1942, the poster for the South American competition, Uruguay in 1942. Just an example of even when there's no football in Europe, they're still playing major tournaments in South America and still sending a lot of the fees to FIFA. So in 1946, during the Luxembourg Congress I was just mentioning, Brazil put itself as a player that want to host the World Cup of 1950. Brazil wanted to host the World Cup since 1938, but in the context of the World War II, the post-World War II, they were trying to have this event as part of this moment of international projection, right? So Brazil proposed to host the 1950 World Cup and promised FIFA that they're going to build a stadium that's going to be capable to have 200,000 people at one game. I'm going to talk about the stadium later, right? They also have a very innovative idea. So every World Cup from 1930 to 2002 had a final, except 1950 World Cup. So they have this idea of creating a sort of round robin where everyone plays against everyone in a final group stage. So they have this idea just because FIFA, after 6 years with no games, they were worried about the revenues and the economic impact of the tournament. So if they have, instead of having one final, they have 4 games, decisive games, they're probably going to make much more profitable, and the tournaments are probably going to be huge in terms of revenue as well. So in terms economically, the term actually that was a huge success. There's a famous telegram from the Secretary General from FIFA at the time to Jules Rimet, which was the president of FIFA at the time, that declared that after the tournament, FIFA was rich because after the hard years and the moments that they faced a hard time during the World War II. It's also interesting to mention that because we also have this idea that money is a very recently preoccupation in terms of football, but no, the preoccupation about money, about profit was in FIFA since, I would say, almost its inception. It's also very interesting to mention, this is not the subject of the conversation today, but one of the founders of FIFA, Hirschman, was a Dutchman banker. So even during the foundation, they were considered this concern with how they could make profit and how they can make this World Cup into a very profitable event. But in 1950, one of the challenges is that a lot of teams decide not to participate into the tournament. So Germany and Japan, because of the World War II, they were excluded from the games. Different countries consider Brazil very far, and some of them hesitated to send their teams. There's also a very emblematic story about India, which is there's a lot of myths about this story that India national team they qualified to the 1950 World Cup, but they didn't send a team because there was one of the regulations that obliged every team to play with boots, and they want to play barefoot. But this is, of course, a myth. I mean, I heard different stories, but I never find any evidence about this story. At this time, the reality, I think, is that the World Cup didn't have the place that it had today, which I would say it's almost inconceivable to say that a team would not decided simply not to go, right? And I think since the 1950 World Cup, that never happened after. Now we have all these debates about Iran maybe not coming to the US. It's probably going to be something that didn't happen since a team that forfeit the World Cup, probably something that never happened since 1950s. Um, so I don't know. Maybe it's I'm trying to think of another case, but I don't think uh, that probably be the first one. So also France, Scotland, Turkey also didn't decide to go to Brazil for different reasons. But on the other hand, England was going to participate for the World Cup for the first time following a process of reintegration to FIFA mediated by Stanley Ross, who is going to later be president of this organization. So at the center of this project of Brazil hosting the World Cup was the Maracanã. The Maracanã is, at the time, was the biggest stadium at the world. The capacity of the Maracanã Stadium is 200,000 people. It's also very interesting to say that Brazil, so they had this idea of creating the largest stadium in the world. So to understand a little bit of the scale of the stadium, at the time, the city of Rio de Janeiro, which when the Maracanã is hosted, was constructed, the population was about 1 million people, and the stadium was about 200,000 people, right? So the idea, literally the idea is that everyone in Brazil could fit the stadium. Almost everyone in the city of Rio. There's a story in Brazil called Bernardo Buarque de Holanda. He called that the Nation Stadium. It's also very hard to translate. I have 5 minutes? Okay, it's also very hard to translate this idea of Nation Stadium, but it's pretty much the idea because in Portuguese, the same word, state and stadium, they're almost similar. They're very similar words. But the idea is to think of the stadium of representing the modern nations, where everyone, I would say, everyone has a sort of place. It's also very interesting to see because if you go to a modern stadium, there's very individualized cities. In Brazil, the old format of stadiums, we have this very traditional division where you buy the ticket for the sector, right? You don't buy like chair, there you go, like the specific assigned seat, there you go. So they have this idea into layers. So we have the geral, which is, I would translate it as the sitting, they're standing place, the stands, the honor tribune, and the premium package. So everyone will have a place in this new modern Brazil. But what happened later? So Brazil qualifies so just like I said, Brazil qualifies to the final round robin, which was Brazil, Uruguay, Sweden, and Spain. Brazil beat Sweden 7-1. Brazil beat Spain 6-1. Uruguay draw the first game, and the second game won 3-2 in the last minute. So the final game was Brazil and Uruguay, and Brazil only needed a tie to 1. Everyone was expecting Brazil to do well because they won the first 2 games with a very important goal advantage, but no, Brazil lost the game into almost last minute goal. Can you play the video, the second video? I'm gonna play the games, the World Cup. Yeah, so this is the World Cup match. And people talked about this game for a long time. And there's a lot of theories why Brazil has lost the game, right? And one of the most popular theories about this, just like I was saying, this game was supposed to be the peak of this project of international order that Brazil was trying to achieve after the World War II. But just like the project, the Brazil was hoping to have this special place in the post-World War II moment. This game symbolized this project has failed, right? But later, when Brazil hosts the World Cup again, they start to revisit this story because I'm not sure how many of you remember 2014, Brazil lost to Germany 7-1, which was much greater dishonor than 1950. And this is the front page of one of the newspapers in 2014 after Brazil lost the World Cup. Congratulations to the 1950 World Cup second place runners up that didn't do like they did in 2014. So they start to revisit this story and to maybe to look at the story into a different perspective. So thank you so much. I'll be happy to answer the questions later. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boulamaki. So next up, we have Dr. von Klimo, who's a professor here in the history department, who I think a lot of you know. He's going to talk to us. So we just got the most successful men's national team, despite all the tragedies we just heard about. And Dr. Klimo is going to talk about the second most, but not the most successful men's national team in the history of the World Cup, which is Germany. So welcome, Dr. von Klimo. I'll get you set up.
Thank you, Lev. Well, actually, I'm talking about the most successful team for some time. But this is the story of a country that does not exist anymore, West Germany. Because the longer we're, in time, the longer we're distant from 1990 when East and West Germany were reunified, the more I understand that West Germany was something completely different, and especially in the history of soccer. So I will try to explain what made it so different. And the moment that I mostly want to focus on is the 1990 World Cup when West Germany won the third trophy after 1954 and 1974. One of the reasons why they were so strong was this was the World Cup in Italy, the final in Milan. And West Germany had 5 very strong players: Matthäus, Völler, Andi Bremen, who scored the penalty, Jürgen Klinsmann, who was a US coach for some time, Guido Buchwald. They all played in Italy at the time. And Italy, the Serie A at the time, was the best league. It was like the Premier League today in England. So that was one of the advantages that West Germany had. But West Germany, what was interesting during that time, and that's, I have to say something more personal. So I remember this summer of 1990, I was 26 years old. I was a student at the Freie Universität Berlin, a free university of West Berlin. And it was just a few weeks or months before reunification that happened in October of 1990. So there was still 2 German states, West Germany and East Germany. And I remember we watched this game in our dorm, which had a very dirty kitchen and a very small TV set. But I remember this was one of the most wonderful summers in my time, in my life. And what is interesting is that Willy Brandt, he was a very popular politician at the time. He was chancellor for some time. And he said, after November 1989, the Germans are now the happiest people in the world. And that was still, this euphoria was still going on until the summer of 1990. So this was just a dream come true. 3rd-time world champion, everything is fine, people are very happy. And the backstory is that the first World Cup that West Germany won was 1954. That was just the first World Cup that they were allowed to come back, because 1950 they could not, because in World War II they had destroyed all of Europe, the whole continent, killed millions of people. And in 1954, Germany was divided in East and West, an American part and a Soviet part. And West Germany was this really strange country. It was not a nation state, it was just part of a nation. It was protected by the United States, which is sometimes forgotten today, but because there was 1 million Soviet soldiers in East Germany stationed who were kind of threatening the West. But anyway, what was interesting was that soccer became the most important thing almost for West Germany. That was something that, like in Brazil, everybody was watching. It was very similar. It became a symbol of Germany because it was the only thing that was not directly related to the Nazi past. In 1954, when they won the first World Cup against Hungary, which was the better team, but that's another story. Has to do with this company, Adidas, because Adidas is a very typical West German company. They started as a small shoe factory and they became a world giant. I guess a lot of you are wearing, no, you're wearing Nike, which, sorry. Yeah. Anyway, but Nike is now, I don't know whether they are bigger, but I'm not an economist. Anyway, but it's a very story that shows how West Germany rebuilt after World War II. There was a lot of small, very specialized companies that became world leaders in their field. It's often machinery or things like that. So that's how West Germany became one of the biggest economies, the third largest after the destruction of World War II. And so what Adidas did was, so before it became Adidas in the 1930s, it was just a shoemaker who said, I'm specializing in sports shoes, which was a complete niche at the time. But he had these ingenious ideas like adding spikes to racing shoes. So Adi Dassler, that was his name before Adidas was founded after World War II. He just, he had some sport Olympic athletes and he helped them, like Jesse Owens. He helped Jesse Owens to win the gold medals in 1936 in the Nazi Olympics, which was kind of ironic because he was also a member of the Nazi party. I mean, Adi Dassler, of course. Later they tried to silence that, but it was complicated. But after World War II, Adidas said, okay, we're inventing new things. And one was the cleats that you could remove and you could change. So in 1954, West Germany won the World Cup also because it was raining like crazy in Bern in Switzerland on that day. And the Hungarians, they were technically a much better team. But the West Germans had this thing that they could change the cleats of their boots to some that were deeper. And so they didn't slip as much as the Hungarians in that game. That was one of the big advantages, because Adi Dassler had invented these removable cleats. So that's just one example of how soccer, economy, and politics, also this idea that Germany has to kind of recreate it themselves, all came together in West Germany, but only in West Germany. And okay, I have to prove that West Germany is, okay, the next, yeah, oh, yeah, no, sorry, go back one more. So this is to prove that West Germany was the best, the most successful team between 1954 and 1990. They appeared in all World Cups. They 8 times they made it to the semifinals. That's insane. 3 times winners, 3 times runners up. It means they won 6 of the 8 semifinals. So yeah, Brazil won 3 times, but they were only once third and one. So it's very clear that West Germany was dominating soccer. And now the next one, since 1990, even if they won the World Cup again in 2014, they did much worse than West Germany. That has to do with the fact that West Germany was a very special country, and soccer was just very important for society, for the economy. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. von Klimo, very much. And so next, we're going to move to Nigeria and other parts of Africa as well. And I'm happy to welcome Dr. Chuka Onumachili. He's visiting us from Howard University. He's written quite a number of books, actually, about soccer media politics, especially, but not only in Africa. So thank you so much for joining us. And he's going to be talking to us about 1974 to 21st Century World Cup, Africa's journey from obscurity to attention.
Now, how many of you here are really going to watch the World Cup? I expected everybody's hands to go up here. How many of you are going to watch the World Cup? Okay. How many of you are going to support Nigeria? But Nigeria is not in the World Cup. I was just checking. One of the things that I want to talk about today, of course, is looking at Africa. 3 periods. One is prior to 1994. And the reason I've chosen 1994 is looking at Nigeria's performance during that period. And I've been watching soccer since I've been 12 years old. 1994, July 5 versus Italy in Boston was the saddest day that I've ever experienced. And I'm going to talk about that day today. However, before talking about this, I would want to share with you a background that's very important to me. That background is to point out that Africa had only become represented in the World Cup from the Second World Cup, which took place in 1954 or so? Now, 1934 rather. And at that time, it was Egypt that represented Africa. But the thing about that period was Africa did not have automatic qualification. Out of 16 countries that qualified for the World Cup final in those days, it's not like today where you have quite a number of countries going to the World Cup. At that time, it was limited to just 16 countries. Europe had 10 of those places. South America had 4 of those places. How many left? Just 2. One of them went to the Caribbeans and North America. What did Africa get? Africa had to play against Asia in order to get to the World Cup. So Africa said, no, we are not having this. So in the 1996 World Cup, Africa said, we are not playing. We are not coming. If we don't get an automatic place, it's not happening. So Africa boycotted that World Cup. They didn't come in 1966. But the boycott had a good result. After 1966, one of the things that happened is Africa now had an automatic place in the World Cup. So it changed. However, 1974, shortly after that, Africa sent a representative by the name Zaire. Does that country exist today? Help. The Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is within, I believe it's within a few weeks, they are looking forward one game to get to the World Cup, the first one that they would get to since that 1974 appearance. This team, by the way, was at that time, I would say, the strongest team in Africa, and there was no question about it. Incredible talent. But at the World Cup, something happened. it was the most disappointing result produced by an African team. They played 3 games, no wins, no draw. They lost all 3 games. Greatest talents, but didn't produce when it mattered. And I'm going to show you a clip from that. Very disappointing. This was very disappointing for Africa because, as I said, clearly this was Africa's best team at that time. But at the World Cup, they didn't produce. There were several questions about it. Very few answers, by the way. But having said that, Nigeria then arrived in 1994. And I'll tell you a personal story about 1994. Please make sure you're checking my time because sometimes I get into this story and I forget about the time. 1994, I and some friends working with the FA, I had the opportunity to pick up the tickets for Nigeria in Los Angeles. I was sent to Los Angeles and we had the first round tickets for all 3 Nigerian games. And the way it was those days was, look, they didn't tell us exactly the building where we are going to pick up the tickets. Instead, they told us a location where we would arrive. And I arrived in Los Angeles. First of all, there was an earthquake that day. But it wasn't a major earthquake, but I wanted out of Los Angeles. So I arrive in there, and I go to this building, and they had it boarded up. And they told us where we should be walking around, and that someone that we should look at would have a cell phone and would be talking on a cell phone. And at that time, cell phone wasn't as predominant as it was today. So immediately I saw this guy, I then approached him, and he took me to the building. And I'll tell you, you would never expect that this was where they would be distributing the tickets. The building was boarded up from the outside. And when I came in there, they gave me the tickets for the 3 games. And they had security all over the place. And they told me, look, you have the tickets, you've signed for it. It's all on you at this moment as you leave here. And they told me that the Brazilians had picked up the tickets and they came with an armored car. I didn't have an armored car. So the moment they told me that, I was extremely fearful because I then took this ticket in my briefcase and I was walking down the street to my hotel. And I was so, would I say really, kind of going crazy because after a little while I would look back thinking that people are following me. Well, nobody knew that I had tickets, but that it was all in my head. And I got to my hotel room. I couldn't wait for morning to come. When the morning came, I went to the airport and I got home to my place. I went to the attic, opened up the attic and put the tickets out there because I didn't want to tell anybody that I had those tickets. And then we advertised and had the tickets sold. Now, those tickets took me to the first round games. So I watched those ones live. But those are not the ones that I'm about to tell you. So I'm going to move on quickly to that. Here, I rarely talk about going to Boston. One of the things that I mentioned here is the game against Argentina. There was no hotel anywhere 20 miles to Boston or in Boston. So what we did was actually drive from DC, 9 hours to Boston, watch the game, turn right back, drive back to Maryland. 9 hours each way. So we did that for the Argentina game. For the Greece game, which was the final game, there was a hotel, so we stayed there. The Italian game, I didn't have tickets to it, and that's the main one that I want to talk about. By the way, this is the ticket to the Nigeria-Greece game. This game against the Italians, I was home watching that game. We had come into this World Cup, that's Nigeria came into this World Cup, ranked number 5 in the world. Till today is the highest ranking that an African team ever had. We had some of the greatest players in the world for this World Cup. And we had been doing well. By the way, if you check the records, Bulgaria finished 3rd in that World Cup. The very first game in that same World Cup, Nigeria beat Bulgaria by 3-0. Nigeria lost this game against Italy that I'm about to share with you, and almost won that game with a minute to the end. Italy went all the way to the final of that World Cup and only lost to Brazil on penalty kick. That's to show you or to explain to you how good this Nigerian team was. At this very game, you would see the video shortly. Nigeria went ahead in this game after about 27 minutes. We were ahead, and we were playing well. The Italians became desperate. Towards the end of the game, one of the great Italian players was sent off. Now we had 11-10 advantage. We had the game in control. This is a game we should win under normal circumstances. But disaster happened. 2 minutes to the end. And I play it in my head every time. Maybe this player could have done something. Why didn't he tackle? These are the things that keep going through my head. That last minute, we conceded. It became 1-1. A game that we were one man ahead, one goal ahead. We were now going into overtime. And in overtime, as you know, it hurt badly because Italy went ahead on a penalty kick. And I look at that penalty and I wonder why. Why did the Nigerian tackle? It was like a wrestling game. Why did he even do that? It wasn't necessary. But it's part of history now. We conceded that penalty, and that was it for us. This was a game in the afternoon. I tell you, at the end of that game, at my home in Laurel, I went to sleep in the afternoon, not to wake up till the next day, because in my head, it kept coming back. This could have happened. This is what we should have done, but we never did that. And today, it's part of history. I say, of all the bad losses that we've had, that is the one that sticks in my mind. This World Cup, Nigeria is not going to be there. We lost to the former Zaire, Congo Democratic Republic. But that game is not at the level of the game that I just talked to you about. So here in closing, I just talk about a few more things. One of the things that I want to talk about here is the leveling of the playing field, the African Confederation and the Asian Confederation. If we go back to the years that I talked about prior to, or even at 1966, okay. So prior to 1966, Africa didn't have an automatic place in the World Cup. How many do we have today? Any guess? How many African teams? exactly. 9, about 9.5. So that's a big change. The other thing also is UEFA football has also helped us. Some of you may know about the Bosman rule, or you may not know about the Bosman rule. I don't have the time to talk about it. But the Bosman rule is very important in helping to develop African football because it has opened the road for Africans to play in Europe. And that has helped to improve African football, as I point out here. We're also using foreign-based nationals. And I also believe that the new World Cup for clubs will also help advance Africa. So this is, in general, my talk today. I wish that we have, more time to talk about this, but at the end, you can come up to me, and if you have something to talk about in terms of the World Cup, I would be looking forward to having that discussion. So thank you.
Thank you for reliving that with us, even if it is painful in that way. Why does he make the tackle? Oh, no. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Onumachili. And so now we've got our final speaker, which is Dr. Nikki Akavan, who you all might know from here at CUA, the Media Studies Department. She's going to talk to us about soccer in Iran. And she's written a number of pieces about soccer and Iranian politics and gender. Some of you have read one of her articles in one of my classes. I think some of you are in here. So let's welcome Dr. Akavan. And if we have a little time for questions afterwards, we'll do that.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick so we will have time for question and answers. As Lev just said, I work on Iran. I've written about Iranian soccer, but when I write about soccer, I'm interested in the games, but mostly I'm interested in what happens around the games, the politics of the games, the media coverage of the games. What are some social movements that are created around the games? And so today, then, there's so many memorable and painful moments that I could talk about when it comes to Iranian soccer and World Cup. And actually, some of the most interesting moments happened during the qualifying stage of World Cup. People tend to be even more excited and unrestrained during the World Cup qualifying stage. But when okay, sorry. But when I was asked to participate in this panel, I knew that is this still not? Okay, I just don't want to have that weird. Oh, this is a good mic. Okay. Okay. Well then, it's like the distance of the mic, the distance of the glasses. So when I was asked to be a part of this panel, I knew that specifically I wanted to talk about Iran-US games in the World Cup, 2 particular moments in Iran-US games, but not moments that took place on the pitch. Great moments in World Cup history that were actually on the sidelines before and after the game. And so my contribution to the panel today, I think I'm all. Can I hold it? So when the 2 moments that I will talk about, and I have clips though I don't have a PowerPoint, is to highlight the context of these 2 great moments in terms of sports diplomacy. I think one of our panelists touched on what sports diplomacy is, but I'll give you a general definition of it. Sports diplomacy is the use of sporting events, as one additional arena outside of traditional diplomacy. That's it. It's a arena for diplomacy outside of traditional diplomacy. What does that mean? It plays out in different ways. So it could be things like opening informal channels between countries that don't talk to each other. It could be building person-to-person relationships between countries. It could be to ease political tensions. That's what sport diplomacy has usually been defined as. And so there's 2 moments in Iran-US World Cup games that I want to talk about in this context. And the first of them takes place in 1998 in the France World Cup. That game has been described as one of the most politically charged and most politically symbolic games in World Cup history, because then as in now, I mean, when I was thinking about this, I didn't think we'd be in the middle of a war, but it is really timely and sad that we're talking about this in the middle of a hot war. But in 1998, just as now, there were no diplomatic relations between the United States and Iran. And at that point, there had been nearly 2 decades of very strained relationships between the two countries because there was the 1979 revolution, and diplomatic relations had been cut off. There was the hostage crisis in the embassy in Tehran. And so there was, on top of there being no diplomatic relations, both Iranian media and the US media, then as in today, had very negative depictions of each country. And remember, this is in the late 90s, so it's like it's just beginning to be popular, like the internet is just beginning to be popularized. So there aren't any people-to-people direct ways of communicating with one another. So you just have negative media on both sides, and there was few opportunities for political and cultural exchange between the people of the United States and the people of Iran. So as I said, my focus is not on the game itself, although the game was a fabulous game, and I'll say a little bit about it in terms of diplomacy at the very end. That game was a 2-1 victory for Iran. It was their first World Cup, it was their first game that they ever won at the World Cup. So of course people were very excited about it in Iran. But it was the diplomacy that preceded it and the way that the players acted on the pitch that became very, very important in that moment, and it's become a lasting moment. So maybe we can see that. What you just saw there, I hope you got to see it. It happened so fast, but it was the exchange of gifts between the two teams. And it was a very, very detailed, Oh, this is from the okay. So everything that happened in that moment with them exchanging gifts was very carefully choreographed, very carefully prearranged by, FIFA was sort of the mediator there between the two teams, but it wasn't directly, the state wasn't directly involved, but there was a form of sort of indirect involvement in that. And they even, so the Iranian captain presented white flowers to the American team. They exchanged gifts. FIFA had the Iranians approach the Americans first. Apparently that was a reversal of traditional order. I don't know if the traditional order is alphabetical or what, but every sort of step was carefully choreographed. And they posed together for a team photograph, which was not traditional then. The teams took pictures together. That was also highly unusual. And they played, anybody remember that game? That game, people, if you watch that game, you can kind of see how both sides, I mean, they played fine, they played well, but everybody's being kind of timid in a good sense. Like they're being very respectful of one another. And in fact, FIFA awarded both of the teams fair play awards after, at the conclusion of the World Cup. All that to say, everything went swimmingly. It was very nice. And the symbolism was very clear. As I said, all the steps were very carefully choreographed so nobody could misread it. Like, oh, is there anything hostile? No, it's very legible to all kinds of audiences. White flowers, peaceful, exchanging pennants, shaking hands, all very lovely. Now, the next moment in 2022, that's a very different moment in a number of ways. Whereas in 1998, you had political openings inside of Iran. And from the US side, there seemed to be some gestures of let's have, civilizational dialogues, or let's have some kind of cultural exchanges. That is not the case in 2022. There's a return of geopolitical tensions, and inside Iran itself, it's right in the middle of a huge social movement, which some of you guys might remember because people are talking about it again now. It's a very successful cultural revolution called the Women, Life, Freedom movement that was happening at the time. And it's 2 months of sustained protests, and the Iranian team is playing in the middle of that. So you have that difference. You have internal strife. And then you have a very polarized diaspora. So before, everybody supported the Iranian national team, But since that time, there's been a rise of dark money funded, essentially propaganda Persian language outlets that have caused a lot of divisiveness both inside and outside Iran. And so you had divisions among the fans too. So it's a very different and worse in many ways moment. And the game, of course, goes differently as well. This time the Iranians lose, and their loss, I think it was a 1-0 loss. If they had equalized, they would have been able to advance for the first time ever, because they've never advanced out of the group of 16, and they lost. And so you imagine this, all the weight they're carrying of all the stuff that's going on in Iran. Half their fans are yelling at them. The politics are just, very, very disturbing for the players who are trying to play in this kind of situation, and then they lose their chances. So what happens is, nonetheless, there is this beautiful moment or moments that happen right after the game when the Iranian players start to cry, particularly this clip. Do you want to show the clip first? So this very human and sweet moment between Anthony Robinson and, God, what's this guy's name? Ramin something. It was spontaneous. There was no, long negotiations beforehand, just a human moment. And actually it wasn't the only moment between players, because there were other Iranian players who were crying, and there were other Americans who went over them and hugged them. And there was sort of like a group hug situation that that you could see if you were watching, the games. And of course, these moments, both of them, the 1998 moment and the 2022 moment, have afterlives in the internet, on YouTube Shorts, and they sort of come up over and over again. And so despite the fact that it was such different moments politically in terms of who was open to having diplomatic relations or sports diplomacy or not, those moments still happened. And so I kind of wanted to end this on that happy note of, oh, how wonderful the people-to-people connections will endure. But since somebody mentioned that maybe Iran would not go to the World Cup, I thought maybe, do I have time to say that? 2 minutes? Okay, I can say it in 2 minutes. So where are we now in this moment is that, so Iran has qualified again, and after the war on March 12th, President Trump put out not a tweet, a post on Truth Social, basically saying, oh yeah, sure, you guys can play here, but we can't, he said, but maybe it's not appropriate because you're not going to be safe. And so then the Iranians responded by complaining to FIFA and saying, hey, this is the host nation saying they can't guarantee our safety. What are you going to do about it? We want to play in Mexico instead. And so then FIFA so far has said, no, you're not going to play in Mexico. We're going to keep the same schedule. So it's a to be determined. And so now the question of sports diplomacy takes on a whole other dimension in this particular moment. So I'll end with that.
I'm going to hold this too. Thanks so much, Dr. Akhavan. And thanks, really, can we give the whole panel another round of applause? There's a lot of different moments in World Cup history on a lot of different continents. So we have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask any individual person here, you can just go ahead and raise your hand. All right, we got one back here. I think I'm supposed to bring the mic around.
I'm a nice dude, sorry.
Yeah, it's for the stream, actually.
Oh, okay. I'm just the first World Cup that I was deeply aware of was USA '94, and I know we referenced it quickly in this. I would love to have some perspectives. We've got sort of great global perspectives here. The legacy of that World Cup, USA '94, on the U.S.'s place in the soccer global ecosystem, which before that wasn't much. We've got 4 different perspectives here: Africa, South America, Asia, and Europe. What does the world make of USA Soccer?
Who wants to take that one? All right.
Just my perspective is, as a Nigerian, one of the things I think is USA Soccer has come a long way. US is respected. Its soccer is respected. Not just the full national team, but also the the younger national teams. So the United States definitely a team that people must respect as the World Cup comes around. There's a lot of talented players here, and one thing that also helps the United States is the fact that dual citizens may declare for a country, and based on the advancement of the United States, you have there is an advantage for people, for players to declare to play for the United States. So certainly, US they've beaten Nigeria. I think the last two international friendlies that we've had with them. So definitely, it's a team that we recognize as a strong team.
We probably have time for one more question if anybody wants. It was an interesting sentiment to end on, probably, because U.S. soccer has maybe been on an upward trajectory, kind of like this maybe, in a little bit for the last few years, and coming at a moment where the U.S. is standing on the global stage in other ways is up in the air in all kinds of different ways. So we're at a very interesting moment that way. To that end, we'll let Dr. von Klimo have the last word here.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, America was one of the pioneers in soccer. It was very early developing, and then 1930 they were third in the World Cup. Of course, it was a very small World Cup and all that, but still, in 1950 they defeated England, and England was kind of in shock about that. So American soccer history is fascinating, and then there's this big gap between 1950 and 1994, which is just empty to some extent. Or local, let's say it's local, but not international.